Last video, we talked about Call of Duty World at War, but this time I want to go back to that game that came out just a year earlier. Call of Duty Modern Warfare, or as most people would call it, Call of Duty 4. I know I've been covering a lot of these old school Call of Duty campaigns lately, but there is just something about how nostalgic and straightforward they were that makes them really fun to revisit. And for those waiting on the BioShock content, don't worry, I haven't forgotten. The BioShock Infinite video is still in progress, and honestly this one is kicking my ass. But anyways, let's talk about Call of Duty Modern Warfare. Now, I would put Modern Warfare at number 4 of my top 5 Call of Duty campaigns. It's not advanced in the sense of having branching choices or complex mechanics, but it nails what Call of Duty was really about back then. A casual, arcade-style first-person shooter with tight pacing. Literally every time I replay it, that's the exact vibe that I get from it. And honestly, it's the only Call of Duty where I feel that way. Let's talk about some of the great things about this campaign. First thing that I have to mention is the briefing style and the game's theme and story. Modern Warfare doesn't really have all of these cinematic cutscenes. The cutscenes are pretty much intel drops where it feels like you're in a briefing room for the most part. And I think the game does a really great job with the story. And if you need a refresher on this straightforward but powerful story, here's how it goes. In Russia, loyalists are locked in a civil war against ultranationalists with control of 15,000 nuclear weapons hanging in the balance. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, a man named Khaled al-Assad seizes power in a coup backed by the ultranationalists. You bounce between the SAS and the U.S. Marines, fighting what seem like two separate conflicts, until al-Assad detonates a nuclear bomb, killing 30,000 Marines and revealing that he wasn't the main one who was responsible for his acts of using nuclear weapons. After interrogating and killing al-Assad, you learn that a man named Imran Zakhaev was the true one who was responsible. Captain Price's failed attempt to assassinate Zakhaev years earlier comes back into play, and the war escalates as Zakhaev seizes a nuclear launch facility and fires 2 ballistic missiles at the US, which could kill a total of 41 million people. The SAS and the Marines manage to abort the missiles before they impact the US and kill Zakhaev in a desperate final stand, narrowly saving the world from nuclear war, which could be World War III. While the story was quite simplistic, it still gave a feeling that there were high stakes when it came to fighting al-Assad's militia and the ultranationalists. Let's look at the game for what it is. You had Crew Expendable, which was a really great starting mission that showed what the two enemy factions are. You had Shock and Awe, which was al-Assad's smartest trick against the US Marines that tricked them into going into the radius of a nuclear bomb. You had Safe House, where you find al-Assad and learn about Zakhaev's huge involvement. You got One Shot One Kill, which shows that Zakhaev cheated death after an assassination attempt that appeared successful. Ultimatum, where Zakhaev steps up the stakes of the war and launches missiles at the United States, and etc. Listen, almost every single mission had a lot of value and was important to the story, with the exception being the Bog and Death from Above. Now, if you ever want a full recap of the story, let me know and I could make a video on that. Now, while Call of Duty 4 wasn't anywhere near as dark and gritty as the following game, World at War, the game was very grounded to where when you think of the experience, you can't help but think, yeah, this is Call of Duty, if you know what I mean. I wouldn't say the game was exceptional, but Call of Duty 4 was simply nothing but, core Call of Duty gameplay. There wasn't all this extra stuff in terms of the gameplay and the story that really threw off the experience. It's a hard feeling to explain, but every time I played the game, I never had to remind myself what this game was, and I think that was a strong suit of it. It may sound like a negative thing to say that Call of Duty 4 has confusing climax points, but I'd actually argue that that's a good thing, at least in this game it is. Just as a reminder, a climax is the moment of highest tension, excitement, or intensity in a story, movie, game, or event, often a turning point where the main conflict is confronted and the resolution starts beginning. With that in mind, let me ask you a question. What do you think the climax is? Personally, I see Shock and Awe as the climax. Due to the nuclear device that was located and detonated, that got Captain Price to ask al-Assad where he got it. If it wasn't for the detonation that happened, the real things Captain Price would have been looking for in that interrogation were militia operations, ultranationalist funding, or maybe even al-Assad's future plans. At that point, who knows how long it would have taken to figure out that Zakhaev was alive and behind all of this, and who knows if Al-Assad's phone would have rung to simply give Captain Price any answer. At the same time, you could just as easily argue that Safe House is the climax, since that's where the interrogation reveals that Imran Zakhaev is alive and responsible for everything, which simply shifts the story from Al-Assad's militia to the real villain. Then you have Sins of the Father, which is a very debatable climax. It doesn't have the craziness of a nuke or the urgency of a missile launch, but Viktor Zakhaev's death makes the war deeply personal and pushes Imran Zakhaev over the edge, adding to the reasons why he hates the West. And finally, if you want to be more traditional about story structure, the climax would be Ultimatum, when Zakhaev launches 2 ballistic missiles at the United States, threatening 41 million lives. That's the moment of greatest danger, and it's the literal ticking clock and the point where the story can only be resolved by stopping Imran Zakhaev. The fact that you can make a case for all of those moments just shows how packed this campaign is with intensity, escalation, and unforgettable turning points. And lastly, let's talk about the game's legacy and influence. When people bring up Call of Duty 4's legacy, the conversation almost always goes straight to multiplayer, but the campaign deserves just as much credit. This was a game that set the standard for what a Call of Duty campaign should be. Short, punchy missions, shocking twists, perspective switches that keep the story fresh, and that perfect balance of grounded military realism mixed with just enough over-the-top action to feel like you were starring in an action movie. The idea that a campaign could deliver moments people would still talk about years later, whether it's the nuclear blast or simply just sneaking through Pripyat in a ghillie suit, all started with Call of Duty 4. Even the way the game structured its story, jumping between different squads and storylines that eventually tied together, became more mainstream due to Call of Duty 4, and led to the series leaning on that style ever since. Call of Duty 4 didn't just tell a good story for its time, it pretty much built the playbook for how every future Call of Duty campaign would be judged. And that right there is why I found its campaign so great, and because the campaign was so great, I think the developers pursuing the storyline and ending it at Modern Warfare 3 was a really great call, and easily made the Modern Warfare series my preference over the Black Ops series, if you could really even call it a series. But hey, those were just my takes and interpretations on the game. I want to know, what do you feel like is an underrated or overrated mission in Call of Duty 4's campaign? I'd ask you what your favorite mission is, but we both know what that'll turn out to be. Anyway, thanks for watching and I'll see you in the next one.